Hello, welcome to the Pipelines Workshop. Today we will cover the basics of setting up a simple delivery pipeline made of just simple Git hooks and shell commands. And the idea is that you want to be able to commit a change to a repository and after some processing, see those changes deployed to a production environment. And hopefully there are some things there that would prevent bad things from being deployed. So, what is a pipeline? If you remember from the lecture, pipeline is an architectural style for processing changes in an incremental manner so that you could have various independent stages that can check, test, transform any of these inputs, in our case, a commit, along a series of filters and or stages. And what you'll find in practice is a DevOps pipeline or delivery pipeline is going to be very complicated with many different types of stages and technology used. But what I like to point out is that even though things like Spinnaker and Jenkins could be used to build pipelines, using just simple tools such as Git and shell commands, you could get the job just as easily done. And that's kind of the nice thing about this workshop is you'll see within 20 minutes, you'll have the most simple pipeline that you can imagine. All right, so when you get started, you'll want to import this pipeline, the pipeline workshop into your notebook server, or if you're doing this manually, clone. And don't forget to use the recursive flag because there's a sub module that we're using here that will be our application that we're deploying. All right. If you have imported this as a notebook, you'll want to run this because what will happen is by default, any new changes that you run on this inside this app directory is going to be in a detached head state, which basically means it is going to be harder for you to deploy from the branch. So by checking out our repository so that it's going to be tracking the master branch, then it's going to be easier to use normal uh, Git commands. All right, the second thing that you're going to want to run is the command for provisioning our VM. And in this case, we have a Baker YAML file that we're using to provide all the arguments and a little startup script that will help install Node.js and PM2, which is a process monitor that we'll use later. So if you run this, this will set up our VM and configure Node.js. So that might take a while, especially if it's being done for the first time. All right, so that is all ready to go. The other thing I want to point out is that you can use op-unit to check the progress of your workshop. So if you run this, you will see it makes sure that your local environment's okay. And then it's going to check to see various steps along of the workshop, including your local apps directory and the VM that you're deploying to. So you probably want to come back to this step and run this again once you've made some progress to see how you're doing or to see if it could help you figure out any problems that you might have. All right, so one of the key concepts that we're going to be learning about today are hooks. So a hook is a mechanism for responding or we're specifying an action that will occur in response to an event. And usually you could compose these together to create a simple pipeline. Git itself provides a hook mechanism that can be used to respond to certain events, such as commits or pushes. So we will be using that capability for our workshop. I'd say that there are three key hook events that are interesting for most Git repositories, though there are almost a dozen different types that you could potentially hook into. But I want to point out these three. First is the pre-commit hook. So the pre-commit event will occur when git commit is performed. And what that means is before the commit is actually finalized and made into the repository, this hook can run and inspect the commit and even potentially reject it. And the way that happens is you simply just return a non-zero exit code in the script if there's an error that occurs. Likewise, you can also implement a post-commit hook, which will simply be run after the commit is processed by the local repository. And usually that's good if you want to notify some other service or event in response to that. Likewise, there's also a pre-receive and a post-receive hook that can be run on a remote repository, usually in response to a push. And this will do something similar to processing the commit, except that it's for when you're about to add it into this repository from a remote source. A really good example of this in practice is if you ever tried to commit a large file to GitHub and have seen that your push gets rejected, that's basically happening due to a customized hook that will say, if the size of the commit is larger than 100 megs or whatever that cutoff is, it will actually reject the push event. So that's an example where you see this in action. All right, but let's just try to do something to demonstrate this real quick. And I always like doing this because it's very visual. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a new repository and we're going to commit to it and listen to the post commit event, and then just do something like open up a new browser. It's not a very useful thing, but it is useful for just demonstrating the process itself, right? So I'm in a terminal here, and I'm going to make a hook demo directory, and I'm going to go inside of it and make a new repository. And if I look inside the .git directory, you see that there's a hooks directory. So I'm going to go into there. And then you see all these files here. So all those files are essentially examples for writing different hooks that you could have. And they're actually pretty useful. They have examples of things that you could do. So here's an example of something that is checking for a pre-commit event to see if you add a bad error file name, for example. So let's go ahead and make a new one. So we're going to call this the post commit. And I'm just going to write a simple bash script that will call, in this case, I'm going to use start. And if you call start with a web address, then by default, that will actually open up a web page. Okay, so I have that script, and I'm going to make sure that it's executable. Okay, and now I need to pop back up into my directory, and I'm just going to add a file. So touch git add demo git commit m hello. Right, and then you see all of a sudden this Google page popped up. So if we pop back into here, you could see that our hook actually ran in response to our commit. And because that command was successful, it didn't reject it. So this commit actually exists in the repository. Actually, since it's a post one, It's not going to really do anything. But anyways, that should let your imagination run wild in terms of what are all the crazy things that you could do with hooks. So instead of going too crazy, what we're going to do for this workshop is build a really simple pipeline that implements 3 simple phases or phases, or stages of a pipeline, namely a build, test, and deploy stage. And the key idea is that we're going to be using 2 hooks. We're going to use a pre-commit hook to trigger a build and a test that potentially could error out. And we're going to use a post receive hook that will set up a local environment for a simple Node.js app. And all of this is going to be triggered by a git commit to our local repository, right? So that's the main idea. But let's see what we're working with, right? So let's go into the back up to the root of our workshop and into the app directory. And then you'll notice that there are some files here. And we're just going to try running npm start. And okay, I haven't installed anything. So npm install. All right, so now I could go to my local host. And I'll see just a silly message. It doesn't really mean much, but it shows that this thing is running. All right, so that's going to be an example app that we're going to deploy and make changes to it, and then see if we can see those changes being committed to our production environment. But before that, what we want to do is we want to set up a little part of the pipeline that will actually make sure that the tests are working. So if I run npm test, this will actually run 2 unit tests that make sure that the server is actually up and running, and then the value that's being returned contains a certain property. So it's basically seeing it's checking to see that there's a hi from in the message. Okay, so what we're going to want to do now is we're going to add a pre-commit test or hook that will check to see that npm test passes. And if not, we will reject the commit, right? So in order for that to happen, we need to do a couple things. So first, we have to locate where the hooks are going to be. So unfortunately, the hooks will not be all right. So the hook directory is going to be located a little bit different. So if I look and do a .git directory here, you notice that I don't actually have one because this is technically a submodule. So I need to actually pop back up, and I need to go into .git and then modules and app. And then you see the Git repository for this submodule, which is contained by the parent repository, right? And that's where all the hooks are going to be for this app. So I'm going to go into hooks, and here's where I can make the new pre-commit hook, right? So I'm going to be lazy, copy and paste this stuff in. And make sure that this is executable. And now I'm going to pop back up to my app directory, and I'm going to make a tiny change where I'll just add a file, git add demo, git commit m below. And then I'm going to see a couple things. All right, so we see that the hook ran and it actually ran the test. That's good. And it allowed the commit. I did need to fix something here of where I am still in a detached state. So I'm going to explicitly switch to the master branch. Right, well, helps to remember I'm inside of the Git directory instead of the actual thing. So let's pop back a couple levels and back into app and make my changes here. All right. Okay, so I'm making sure that I switch to the master branch so that commits are going to be tracked properly. And that would be important later for when I need to push them. All right, but the key thing is we have this workflow that should help us prevent bad changes. All right, so let's try to make a bad change. So if I go into main and I change the message I to buy, then this should cause one of the tests to fail, which is checking to see the hi message is there. Right, so npm install is running. It's okay. All right, and so then you see that the test actually failed, right? So it says that it was expecting it to include buy, hi from, and instead it got buy from, and that it says that the commit was canceled. So that saved us from making a bad change. Now you can imagine there's all sorts of reasons why you could have something like this. For example, preventing you from committing something with like a security token, something that might violate coding conventions, or maybe a quick test, like a kind of smoke test that makes sure that you didn't break something simple before committing to running it through the full CI pipeline. Could potentially save lots of headaches. So we've demonstrated a really simple way of being able to do our build and test stage of the pipeline. But we sort of have a lot more work to do because we have no way of really getting that change to flow beyond our local environment. Right now, it's just sitting in our local Git repository, right? So what we need to do now is we need to prepare our production server, the VM that we made in the beginning, such that it could receive updates from our pipeline. And to do that, we're going to take advantage of two things. We're going to take advantage of Git's post receive hook and just kind of the properties of using bare repositories. And what it will look like is something like this, where we run a Git push, and that will trigger a post receive event, which will allow us to set up all the things that we need to in the environment and hopefully start the process. All right, so there's going to be a couple things that we need to do. So we're going to need to get into the machine. All right, so I use Baker SSH to get in. So I'm in the environment, and I'm going to go ahead and prepare the directories I need. So I want a directory called production.git, and then another one called production-ww, which would be kind of like our web server address. Okay, so I needed sudo rights to do that because server's owned by root, but that's going to actually be a problem later on. So what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to go into server and I'm going to show own vagrant on both of these. And I need to be root to do that. And then do the same for .git. All right, so I have those two directories created. Now I want to go into production.git, and I'm going to make my bear repo. So I'm going to do git init, but then I'm going to pass this bear flag. And what that will do is it will essentially create a repository as if this is literally the .git directory that we've seen before. So you see all the objects and refs and branch objects and the head file and a hook directory. This is all here. And there's no working tree. There's no staging area. So you can't use this like you normally would. And what's nice about this is this provides a bare minimum of a Git repository with just enough for offering the hook functionality, but without some of the other issues like having a staging area and working tree that you can have merge issues with on your production environment, because that doesn't sound very fun. So this is kind of a nice way to provide kind of an endpoint for a Git push. Okay, so we have this set up, and what we need to do now is prepare the post receive hook, right? So the post receive hook I'm going to use is essentially going to be this file here. And let me walk you through a couple of the things that it's doing. So for one, it's using this idea of saying what my Git work tree is. So this is an environment variable that says, I want you to put the output of a command in another directory. So this is kind of a useful thing for being able to run this in the context of this repository, but have the results placed somewhere else. Right, so that's what this is going to do. And it's using the git checkout command to place the result somewhere else. And then once that's checked out, it's going to change into that directory and then run npm install. Okay, so let's see if we can get this working. I'm going to change to hooks post receive event, not pre-receive. Okay, so that's all there. Okay, and I'm going to add two more things that will make my life a little bit easier. I am going to add these two commands that will actually start the server for me. So it'll stop any previous instances, and then it will start up the next thing. Okay, so that's there. And I have everything I need on the server's end, unless I mess something up. But I'm going to need to make sure that this side of the pipeline is connected, because there's really nothing that is connecting these things. So what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to have to add a remote. So if you look at git remote right now, you will see I have the origin, which is the original place that I got this from. But in this case, I want to add a new remote that's going to be this production environment. And the syntax of that is essentially remote add, then the name. And this is the URL that I'll use. So it's going to be using SSH with this user and the IP address of the server I have. And then this is the file path, because remember the server /production.git, it's literally the directory where all those objects are in, right? So I'm going to run this. And then you can see it again here. So now this is added. And I need this little bit in front of my Git commands, because this is just a quick way for telling Git, hey, if you need the SSH key for making this connection, this is what you need. You could longer term add this to your SSH config or add a SSH agent that does all that stuff for you. But just for the purpose of this workshop, this is the easiest way to do that. All right, let's see if that actually works. Okay, that didn't work because probably because I'm in PowerShell. All right. All right. If you're on a Mac or Linux environment, that's what you want to do. All right. So let me use a more Windows friendly way of doing this. So I think this. And then let's try that. All right, so some things for me to debug. This probably happened to you. All right, well, the unfortunate hack was just to go into Bash and run the command that works more reliably. So you see like this. So, but let me go ahead and make a change to this so that you can see what we want. Hi from production commit git commit main.js. Right, and you see that the test passed, cool. So now I could mainly run the next step, which is to push to the production remote. Then you can see the checkout command had ran, and now it's going to be running. This is a good chance to show you this other stuff it's doing, the npm install, and it's going to be running the PM2, which is that process manager stop, and then the PM2 start. All right, so npm was taking its sweet time. So see, that's the output from npm install. Then it ran npm PM2 stop, then PM2 start. All right, so this is a good chance to go back into the machine and just poke around and see what is going on. All right, so if I run PM2 status, then I can see if there's anything going on. It looks like the process is running okay, which make a request to make sure that is actually all right. So if I run that, still okay. All right, that's because I'm not running anything localhost. All right, let's check out the actual address of the thing. All right, okay, and we can see our server running on the VM. Pretty cool, and everything looks all right here. All right, so if you look back at our original diagram, let's scroll up here, you can see that we've made a git commit, which was the change from high to production, and it built that locally, ran a test, and then I triggered git push to prod, and that did the rest of the pipeline of where it sent the change to the remote bare repo, which was that production.get, which triggered a post-receive event and ran the script for checking out into the prod ww directory, and then it installed the modules, and then it used pm2 start or stop and pm2 deploy to run the application, which is now on port for 5001. So when you put this all together, you see that we have a fairly reasonable way. Imagine if you're a startup to just have code flow into a live environment whenever you've committed something. And there's a whole bunch of different things you could do to tweak this and make this better. You can have this actually be connected to even GitHub. If you used a webhook instead of just these Git hooks, you could even push out, other notifications like emails, or trigger a Jenkins server, or anything that you want to, even like a monitoring service, et cetera, to say like, hey, look, there's a new change. Go check to see everything's okay, right? So there's a bunch of other steps that you could be adding as part of this pipeline. So this worked out pretty well, but there are a couple interesting conceptual questions you would want to ask yourself. So we already talked about the first, which is tracing the flow of the commit. But what are some issues that might occur if we are always having to run tests in a pre-commit hook? What would that do to your developer's workflow? What are some other things what are some problems with the way we design this pipeline? So imagine that you ran npm install during the test, but then you waited again to run npm install in the deployment phase. Might there be something that occurs that might make that a problem? What do you think that might be? Why do we need PM2? What problem is that solving for us? What in general are problems that might exist that PM2 can't handle? And what are some other stages of the pipeline that we're missing? What else could you do? So these are things that I'd like you to think about, and that's stuff that you can answer in the homework. All right, but if you've gotten this far, you've basically achieved our commit to a repo, 1 second of magic, changes deployed to production promise that I've given you. All right, thanks.